solutions.
I like the best I like is filter and find. Filter is the best.
Filter and find.
Yeah, that's what I like.
Sweet. All right, so we'll just check out the solutions and kind of walk through them. Won't necessarily do the code reading, but we'll check out the solutions for each file. So the first one that we used was a for each. So a for each, we can think about as just a replacement to a for loop. So all a for each is essentially just another way of doing a for loop. Only thing is with a for each, it is always going to loop over the whole array. You know, it's literally saying for each. So for each element or for each item inside of the array. So you'd only really want to use a for each if you wanted to loop over the whole array. If you only wanted to loop over some of the array or have control over, you know, how long the loop runs, you'd probably want to find another method. But if you always wanted to loop over the whole array, then we could use for each to help us out with that. So we had to do two different things. We had to write one line where we were supposed to log all of the numbers in the array. And then we did another one where we logged them in reverse order. So when we use for each, the way the for each works is it expects a callback function. So you're gonna pass a callback function into for each. That callback function can then have three different parameters. It can have one, well, it will need to at least have one, and that parameter will represent the current element in the array. So whatever you're currently accessing inside of that array. You could pass another parameter, which could represent the index. So whatever I assign as the second parameter in my callback function, that is always going to be representing the current index that I'm on in my loop. And then the last one is you could create another parameter, which would represent the array that you're calling for each on. I haven't really found a big use case for why I would kind of do that, but that is there as well. So in our case, we had this array of numbers right here. So the first thing that we were asked to do is we were asked to just log all of the numbers. So the way that we did that is we did a for each on the values array, because that's what I wanted to loop over. For each expects a callback function. So I passed in this arrow function callback function. It's going to have one parameter, and n is going to be standing for each of the numbers in my array, since that's what I'm going to be looping over. And then since all I was asked to do was log them, then I just console log n, and that's going to log each number. And that's my normal order. Then we were asked to do the same thing in reverse. Well, for each, I cannot control the order of where my loop starts. My for each loop is always going to start at the beginning, and then it's going to go to the end. So what I can do though is I can access the index. So I can pass a second parameter to my callback function, and this second parameter is going to represent the current index that I'm on inside of my loop. So now I can access values at, and then subtract 1 minus the index from the length, and this is how I'm accessing the ones from backwards. So for instance, let's say our length is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? So our length is 10. Index is going to start at 0. And then we're going to subtract 1, right? So 10 minus 1 minus 0 equals 9, right? So this is how the first thing I'm accessing is values at 9. Okay, well now my index is going to move on to 1. So now I'm going to do 10 minus 1 minus 1, which is then going to give me 8, which is how I'm now accessing values at 8. Well, now my index is going to go to 2. So now I'm going to do 10 minus 1 minus 2, which would be 7. And this is how I access. So this is how I'm technically accessing the values in reverse order. My loop is still looping from beginning to end, but I'm just using the index to access the values in reverse order.
Yeah, I try to do that. I try to put like put starting from the end, but I did not use minus index. I use it outside. I use it inside the body And it didn't work,
hmm,
but here we notice.
because the index that I'm trying to access is the result of that.
So it's not at the end.
Yep. So I'm gonna start at whatever the length is, subtract 1 from that, and then also subtract the index. And since the index is gonna keep
It's
increasing as my, or
Okay.
1, 2, 3.
So it always starts from the beginning. You cannot make it start from the
With
end.
for each, no. For each is always gonna start at 0. That's always gonna
Yeah,
go
this
towards
is
the
like
end.
the issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Trey?
I posted mine in the chat so you can kind of see what I was talking about. I opened a curly brace after the arrow function. Is that wrong?
No, so the only thing here is arrow functions have 2 types of bodies. They have concise body syntax and they have normal body syntax. So when you don't include arrows, you don't need to include a return statement. When you do include brackets, you have to include a return statement. So in this case, you would return. In this case, since I'm just console logging, I'm not returning anything. So in this case, it doesn't really matter. But if I was wanting this to return a value, like we'll see in map right here, how I'm returning an object. So if I was wanting to return something from this callback function, since you included the brackets, you would have to include a return keyword. That's pretty much the only difference is without brackets, you don't need to include the return keyword. With brackets, you would have to specifically include the return keyword.
Thank you very much.
Any questions about this for each though, and how we're working and using it to loop over? Yeah,
Can I see the other way you did for each? You should just delete it.
the one that traded. Yeah. Let me pull up the chat again.
So there's a, yeah, I noticed, there's a way like this, open brackets. And there's a one is like this, both, like, both way works.
So I said, I just explained it. They're the exact same. Only difference is one, you have to explicitly write a return keyword. The other, you don't.
It's like this, open brackets or. Yeah.
We'll show the difference in the other one. That'll be a better example to see the difference between the two. Any questions about for each? All right, I believe the next one was map. Sweet. So map is really useful for when I want to create a new array, but I want to manipulate all of the elements inside of an existing array. So in our case right here, I wanted to create an array of objects where I wanted to have a price and a sale price, and I'm using the current number of an existing array to do that. And I have another array that I want to create where I want to format the price. So I still want to take all of the values from an existing array, but I want to modify them in some sense. In this case, I want to create objects with them. I want to transform them into a different thing. So this is where map is useful for. I still want to keep all the data from an existing array, but I want to manipulate it into some other, form of data, and I want to, store and keep that array. So we go back to map. We had an array of numbers right here with prices. The first thing that we were asked to do is we were asked to create objects with them. So we needed to transform everything into an object. So utilizing the numbers from the prices array, I want to return an object so that I get an array of objects back. So I map over the prices array, which is going to loop over the whole array. I created our parameter P, which is going to represent each value inside of the array. So P will be 42.42, 10, 28, yada, yada, yada. And then I created our object. So the first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to create a price property, and the price property is just going to be what the normal value is. So you can see price 28.2234. So I create a property called price, and I just set whatever the value of P is to the value of that price property. Then the sale price is gonna be that current number divided by 2. So now I created a new property sale price where I divided 2 from P, which is how I got that divided by 2. Yeah.
So the map, we can control the index, right? We can make it start from the end.
Map, you could do. You could pass another thing as index and then use index in it as well, but it's still. You're still gonna access P is still gonna be the first one. So
we
like
can-
you could still do price objects, you know, at index, so you can still do that thing, but usually you wouldn't. When you map, you're usually gonna start and do the.
You can use, like, for example, set of P, can we use an array and we put inside it the index?
Yeah, like you could do price objects at. Price, you know, objects dot length minus index or whatever. So like you could do something like that, but you usually wouldn't.
But it works, right?
It works.
Okay,
Yeah.
so map is better than for each.
No. Because map returns in an array. For each doesn't return anything. For each just loops. Map actually creates and returns a new array. That's why I had to assign the return value of prices.map to price objects, because I'm saving the array that gets returned from map. When for each, I didn't assign the
Yeah.
return value for each variable because it doesn't return anything.
Return.
So in this case, I'm creating an array of objects. This is also to show the good thing with the two different types of body. Why do I have parentheses wrapped aside this object?
Yeah, I had this other too.
You're still inside the map function.
Still inside the map function, but
Map method.
curly braces are used for what two things?
To loop through every element and create.
No, but when do I use a curly brace? Like when, for instance, if I
Objects.
create an
Object.
object, right? But what about when I also,
Function, create function.
right? So the same curly brace is used to both create an object, but also to create a function body. So if I don't have parentheses, am I trying to create an object? Or am I trying to create the body for the arrow function? Which is why, in this case, we had those two types of body syntax, right? We have concise body, and then we have the normal body syntax. So in this case, if I'm gonna be using concise body syntax of an arrow function, I have to wrap the brackets in parentheses because I am returning an object. I'm not creating the body for an object. So in that case, I had to wrap it in parentheses. Now, if I was not using concise body syntax, well, then now I would do now I would have to specifically include our return. And then, yes. So this is why, this is that difference between when I have the brackets right here versus not. If I have the brackets in my callback function with my arrow function, I have to specifically include a return keyword. If I do not put brackets, then I don't need to include a return keyword. It has something called an implicit return. But in the case of an object, I had to make sure to wrap them inside of parentheses. I saw what you sent. Copy. Yeah, so you just did what I just did right there. Yep.
So this is why we.
Yep. So another valid way of doing it. It's just different. It's just if you're gonna write it this way with the full actual function body, just make sure you include that return keyword. Whereas if you just do it the way that I did it, you don't need to include that return keyword, but you would just have to make sure to wrap it in the parentheses. And then we did the same thing down here for formatted prices. So we looped over our prices array. And then for each price inside of that array, we turned them into a string. So we're using a template literal to write a string. And then I used the toFixed method to control how many decimal points there should be. So you can see that it's supposed to be 0.42, 0.00, 0.22. So toFixed2 is going to make sure that after this number, it's going to only be 2 decimal spots. And then that's what gets returned to formatted prices. So now I have an array of these strings. So map, really useful whenever I want to loop over in an array. I want to modify all the values inside of that array in some way. And then I want to save that new array. Any other questions about map? Right. So now we have find. So find, just like all the other methods we've learned about, it's going to take a callback function. That callback function can also receive the same 3 parameters with the elements, the index, and the array. So what find is going to do is it's going to execute the callback function on every element in the array until it finds the first one that returns a truthy value. So it's essentially going to execute a callback function on every element inside an array. It's going to then either return a true or false to indicate whether that element matched the callback function test. And then that way we know whether or not we found the elements. So in this case, we just defined a couple interfaces for our objects right here. So we have an array of objects for users, and we have an array of objects for products. The first thing we used find for is we used find to find the first user ID that had a value of 2. So users.find. So I'm now going to loop over my users array, which is now going to loop over this whole array. User is going to be representing each object inside of this array. And then I'm going to check to see if the ID of the current user in my loop is equal to 2. So in this case, it's going to check this first one. John's ID is not 2. So this is going to return falsy because it was not 2. So then I know to move on to the second element. It's going to check to see if this ID is equal to 2. It is, so that's going to return true. So now it's going to stop, and then it's going to return this specific object to our user variable. So it's going to find the first element that matches this. So if I had 2 elements that had the same ID, so if Bob also had an ID of 2, this is only going to find the first element and then return that one. So I would not find Bob, I would only find Jane in the case. So it's just going to find the first element that matches, just like our query select loops. Finds the first element that matches that. This is also a great use case of where we could use destructuring. So I'm doing user.id equals 2, right? So the only thing I care about is the ID property. I'm not using anything else from user. So what I could have done is I could have put brackets right here, and I could have put ID, and now I could have just done ID equals 2. So now I'm destructuring the ID property from the object that's inside of my user's array. So this is where we could also see the power of destructuring. So in that case, I had the whole object. So rather than have to write user.id, I could have just written ID. But at that point, it's just kind of preference, whatever you like to do. But that is an example of where I could have used destructuring
Yeah, I used this way, the structuring, but I did not know, okay, why. I found it online, someone used it, but they did not explain why.
It's because it's destruction because we have the object right here, right? So we're looping over our users, which is going to be all of these objects. So when I usually put product or before, when I put user, well, user is going to be a whole object, right? So now by doing those brackets ID, I'm saying, okay, well, I'm receiving a whole object, but now I only want to destructure or create a variable called ID.
ID and assign it similar to users like this. Similar to the structure and putting the user on the right and at the left we put the ID.
Put the user on the right and then the
You
ID.
see like the structure when you put the object name.
Yeah,
user,
where usually when we do destruction, we would have done.
Yeah, like this.
Yes, yeah, ID equals
Yeah,
user.
that's the same thing.
Exactly, yeah, so then this is already, this is essentially doing this part.
Yeah, that's powerful.
So. And then same thing here with the products, we wanted to find the first product in the array whose price was greater than 900. So then we started looping over the products array. We checked to see if the first one was greater than the 900. In this case, it was. So then it just returned the iPhone. It didn't even check the other ones.
Yeah, I noticed can I use debugger on it? It goes quickly to console log.
You could use debugger. You just have to make sure you hit the option to step into the function call.
Oh, so we can do that then,
Yeah.
because like it goes directly to console log.
That's, oh, I didn't compile my code. Do that here. Okay. So no, refresh.
So we can tell it's the.
I changed the theme, so it's, yeah, that'd be easier to see. Okay, so now I'm on this line, right? If I were to just hit next, it goes to the console.
Yeah.
If I hit this one, this option right here, you see how it says
Step in.
step in. So it's gonna allow you to step into a function. So in this case right here, I'm calling a function because I'm doing a loop. So I have to hit step in, and now you can see I'm over here where I'm at user ID, and now I can step through this. Now it's gonna check to see if that was, it found the first one immediately, so that's why it finished. But
Okay.
you just have to hit that step in option.
Mhm.
Awesome. Any other questions about find? All right, filter. So filter is useful for whenever I have an array and I want to create a new array, but that new array is I only want some values that like match some sort of condition or like some sort of a test. So in this case, like we have an array of numbers, and now I have an array of names. So let's say I wanted to create a new array, but only an array of even numbers. So I have all of these numbers right here, but now I only want an array of even numbers. Well, we can use filter to help us accomplish that. So now I'm gonna loop over our numbers array. For each number inside, I'm going to divide it by 2. And since this remainder operator is checking if there's a remainder, if I divide by 2, that means that there should be a remainder of 0, which would make it an even number. So then I check if that's equal to 0. So this callback function is going to return either true or false, indicating whether or not this number matched that test. So now I know that if this callback function were to return true or false, that is what's going to get added to the even array or not. So if in this case, 1 would return false because it is not divisible by 2 and have a remainder of 0. So this callback function would return false, and 1 would not get added to the even array. Whereas then once we got to 2, it would run 2, and the callback function would return true. So now we know that 2 will get added to the even array. And then we do the same thing down here, except now we just have an array of names, and I want to create a new array of names, but only with names that do not include a D. So now I loop over my names array, I check to see if the current name either includes a lowercase d or an uppercase d. So if not includes, so we're checking to see if it doesn't include. So as long as it does not include a lowercase d or an uppercase d, then this will return true, which means I will want to include it in this array of strings without these.
Yeah, yesterday on line 18, if you try to use or, instead of and.
But we want both of them. I don't want only one of them, because what if I did or, well, what if an element has a uppercase d? So in this case, it's gonna check to see if it doesn't have a lowercase d, and it's gonna say true, and then it's gonna return it immediately. But if it still had an uppercase d, then it's
Yeah, I tried to do that on the, like because not is, if it is true, we're gonna make it false. Every time true, making false. It's opposite.
yeah, because if I want it to be included in this array. So I'm not getting an array of things that have d, I'm getting an array of things that do not have d.
So what I notice, and we can use it to remove certain things. So we wanna remove something, just put and to capture something and remove it.
What do you mean? Like, and isn't removing anything. Filter is the one that's removing things. I'm just using and to check for conditions. So and is only useful to evaluate expressions. It's the only purpose
Yeah,
and has.
yeah, it's evaluate, but at the same time, or is gonna be true anytime, so it's gonna like output the whole thing every time, true, false, every time. But and is kind of what I noticed after like playing with it yesterday. And is like it's used on purpose on filtering out because
Yeah, you can use it to your advantage, but and itself is not
Yeah.
removing anything. You're
Just-
using the logic of the and operator to help you accomplish stuff. Yeah. Awesome. Any questions about this before we take a look at the quiz questions? Yeah.
Could you just go over there's a one on the end of the lecture about the prime number. Could you explain it? Kind of. Yeah, this, no, not this one. There's one for prime number, yeah. Yeah, I just wanna try to understand.
Use filter to find all prime numbers in an array. I'm trying to remember what a prime number even is. A prime number is it's a natural number that's greater than one that is not a product of two smaller natural numbers. So a prime number is a natural number greater than one that is not a product of two smaller natural numbers. For example, 5 is a prime number because the only ways of writing it as a product are 1 times 5 or 5 times 1. So a prime number is a number that you can pretty much only write it as a product if you multiply it by itself, is what I'm getting. Yeah, prime numbers are numbers that are only divisible by 1 and they number itself. So what this is doing is we start a loop at the second index. But we create two variables. So we create one variable called I, which we start at the second index. Then we create a new variable called S, where we get the square root of the current number.
That is one.
And then we're gonna loop from I is less than or equal to S. I'm gonna check to see if the current number that got passed in from the array is, if you divide that by the current index, if it has a remainder of 0. Then you return false because it would not be a false number. So for instance, array.filter is prime.
Probably if we use debugger and see like that.
Good, but I mean, to be honest, it's not a good use of our time. Like we're a whole day behind, so I would much rather us move on to new things than figure out how this is necessarily working. You understand how a filter works, and that's the important thing. Figuring out a prime number, unless you have to do something about with prime numbers on your job, it's a waste of time right now. All right. So Noah, can you tell me for each, what does for each do? What does the callback function do? And what is it useful for?
So for each loop, for each is like a for loop. It goes
Yep.
on every element in the loop.
Yep.
Every element in the array.
Mhm.
Okay, and well, what should the callback function? It doesn't return anything.
Doesn't return anything, so it should do whatever the function
Yeah,
does.
it's just achieving a function.
Yep.
What array they're useful for? Yeah, it's to loop over just to loop over the elements in a function.
Yeah.
in the array. So
Whenever I need to loop over an array, exactly. So what does array.forEach do? It calls the callback function once for every element in the array. What should the callback function do? It should do whatever action it chooses, and it's useful for whenever we want to loop through array elements and just perform some sort of an action. Trey, what about map? So what does array.map do? What does the callback function return? And what is it useful for?
So I had it creates a new array populated with the results of calling a provided function on every element in the calling array. It returns a new array with each array element of the callback function. It's useful for transforming and or extracting array elements or properties of objects in an array of objects.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. So what does array.map do? It creates a new array that's going to contain every element that was transformed by the callback function. The callback function itself is going to return whatever that transformed element is, and it's useful for whenever I want to transform or map over every element inside of an array. Noah, what about find? So what does find do? What does the callback function return? And what is it useful for?
So it returns the first value that matches or satisfies the condition inside the body of the line. And should go back, return, the thing is, I thought because it's a callback, it doesn't return anything.
It does return something.
It's because we are returning value.
It's not returning the value
Yeah,
specifically for find.
for find, yeah, it returns a value that satisfies.
What value? It's not returning the array value.
Yeah,
It's returning something to tell the array if we should keep it or not.
Yeah, so it's returning a boolean value.
Yeah, exactly.
But it actually returns an actual value.
But find is not the one. The callback function is not returning that value. Find is returning the value. The callback function is not returning that.
Yeah,
value.
it's a void. Yeah, there's no return.
So find. So find is this whole thing, right? The callback function is only this thing. The callback function only returns true or false to indicate if that current element matched that best. So the callback function is either going to return true or false to tell find whether or not it should keep that element or not. So what does array.find do? It returns the first element in the provided array that will pass the test that was implemented by the provided function. What should the callback function return? The callback function should return a truthy value to indicate whether or not the matching element has been found, or it's going to return a falsy value to indicate that it has not been found. And it's useful for whenever I want to find the first element within an array that matches a specific condition. And then Trey for filter, what does array.filter do? What does the callback function return, and what is it useful for?
So array.filter creates a new array with all elements that pass the test implemented by the provided function. Returns true to keep the element and false returns an empty array. And then it's useful. It allows you to filter an array to only see elements that meet a specified condition.
So what does it do? It creates a shallow copy of a portion of a given array, which will only contain elements that pass the tests implemented by the callback function. The callback function is going to return a truthy value indicating whether we should keep the element in the resulting array, or it's going to return a falsy value indicating that we should not keep it. And it's useful for whenever I want to create a new array that contains some values from an existing array, but that they only meet some sort of a specific condition. Awesome. Any questions about?
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, is it the filter is a similar, it's like a function and inside it, it's a for loop and there's a condition inside.
All of these are. So I mean, filter, find, map for each. All of these are functions that under the hood are just doing loops that are looping over. It's just they're doing the other functionality for us, whether that's returning an array, you know, or
And you're pass, yeah, okay, so it's like a shortcut of doing the
Yeah.
function and passing. Yeah.
any other questions about the methods? Stop the recording then.